Hello everyone, my name is Jane Doherty. I'm an independent social work consultant, and this is a brief video explainer which details the learning from a child safeguarding practice review in relation to a baby known as Isabel, who died at the age of 3 months. I was commissioned by Medway Safeguarding Children Partnership to be the report author, and as such, I wanted to take you through the learning from this review that we found. The first thing I wanted to do briefly was to explain what a child safeguarding practice review is. And it's a statutory multi-agency review of how agencies work together to protect children. So its aim is to learn the lessons to improve practice and to improve systems. It's not an individual critique of individual practitioners' practice. It's looking at systems around child protection and whether or not your system is reliable in terms of your multi-agency networking. So it's not about blame, it's not about individual practice, and it seeks to learn to improve the practice in the identified areas. And the aim is to avoid similar situations occurring should similar families, similar situations present themselves to practitioners. I should add that this content of this brief video should be considered alongside the published report, which you can find on the Medway Safeguarding Children's website. I'd like to tell you a little bit about Isabel. She was a baby girl who died aged 3 months old, and she died at home with her parents. In her short life, she moved in and around Medway with her mother at least 3 times. They lived in temporary accommodation when Isabel was born. They stayed with family in Kent for some time before moving to permanent accommodation just before her death. Sadly, Isabel and her mother experienced some serious domestic abuse in the timeline that we looked at in the review, and she was subject to a child protection plan when she died because of this. As a result, many services were involved. The review covers the antenatal period and the first few months of Isabel's life. So the review period covers May 2021 to March 2022. And during the review period, Isabel's mother had involvement with 2 men. Both of the men were known to services as perpetrators of domestic abuse, and they're known in the report as Adult A and Adult B. Mother was a previous victim of domestic abuse, and this was also a feature of her extended family, and as a result, likely to have also been a feature of her own childhood. So, what did we learn from the review? So we started in the review with the antenatal period and the assessment of risk and need in pregnancy. What we found from the review was that this assessment of risk and need in pregnancy relied too heavily on mother's self-report. Mother and the then unborn baby would have benefited from being considered in a multi-agency forum, which at that point would have been the Medway Maternity Safeguarding Hub. Significant information was missing from the GP, which would also have helped practitioners to make a more accurate assessment of mother's vulnerability in pregnancy. What the review discovered was that the Maternity Safeguarding Hub in Medway does not currently have clear criterion for a referral. And for Isabel and her family, several factors were unknown due to incomplete information. And as a result of this learning, recommendations to the review are made to improve communication between GP practices and maternity services, and to clarify the antenatal pathway and referrals to the Maternity Safeguarding Hub. Risks associated with unsafe sleeping practices was another theme from this review. It's not surprising that mother's vulnerability was not fully recognised in pregnancy due to the missing information. She also made a number of moves prior to and after Isabel's birth. She was avoidant of lots of appointments, and this meant that opportunities to assess safe sleeping and give advice rarely presented themselves to practitioners. So to try and address this learning point, a recommendation was made to review the current arrangements to develop a strategic approach to supporting practitioners in how they communicate advice about safe sleeping to both mothers and fathers and other carers. Dealing with DNAs in maternity services. A feature of this review was the number of health appointments that were not attended by mother before and after Isabel's birth, and the learning from the review, which was confirmed by practitioners who were consulted during the process, that the current DNA policy operated at that time in maternity services lacked clarity. This has now been rectified as part of the very early learning from the rapid review process, and this policy has now been amended, and there is now a clear pathway around expectations of practitioners in cases where attendance at health appointments or maternity services and health visiting services is problematic. The use of safeguarding supervision. So, despite being worried about the lack of attendance at appointments for mother and subsequently Isabel, safeguarding supervision was sought very late in the day for this family. The review found that the expertise of the team of safeguarding professionals, whose role it is to support practitioners on the front line, were underused, and an earlier consultation would have been beneficial. A recommendation from the review looks at strengthening the supervision offered to practitioners, and this is currently under review. The multi-agency response to domestic abuse. As we noted earlier, the two men that mother was involved with were well known to services as perpetrators of domestic abuse. There were a number of serious domestic abuse incidents involving mother and Isabel during the timeline under review. This review highlighted that the multi-agency response to these did not take adequate account of the seriousness of the abuse, Isabel's vulnerability, or the history of the two men involved. Two recommendations are made to improve practice in this area. One is around the strategic multi-agency approach, which would hope to support practitioners on the front line, and another to improve practice around decision-making in respect of domestic abuse at the front door. Working with fathers. A familiar theme from multi-agency reviews is a lack of involvement and assessment of fathers and other significant males and their influence in the lives of their children, and this review is no exception. As we have seen, very little was assessed in terms of either adult A or adult B's histories, and the emphasis for practitioners was on mother to try to protect Isabel. This was despite the violence of both men and their unpredictability of their nature. In view of this, a recommendation was made by the review to encourage a shift to a more inclusive framework that assesses the role of men in children's lives, be it positive or negative. That covers the main learning from the review that we found. And just a reminder that you will find this review and other reviews that Medway have undertaken, as well as other resources on the Medway Safeguarding Children Partnership. Thank you for listening.